Imagine setting off on the vacation of your dreams, only to discover that the ship itself hides nightmares you can't escape. From haunted cabins to mysterious strangers on deck, tonight we bring you 5 terrifying cruise ship horror stories that will make you rethink every vacation. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Fear Spiral, and comment below with the story that scares you the most, because your fear is about to set sail. Cabin 739. My name is Lauren Matthews, and I swore I'd never speak about what happened to me on the Emerald Star, but silence hasn't saved me. Silence hasn't given me sleep. Silence hasn't stopped the scratching in my walls or the whispers in the dark that followed me home. And maybe if I put it all down, maybe if someone believes me, I'll finally be free. Though I know deep in my gut that nothing will ever free me. Not after Cabin 739, not after what I saw there, what I lived through and what I barely survived. It was supposed to be a birthday gift to myself. A solo cruise through the Bahamas after a brutal year of work and heartbreak. And when I checked in, I was thrilled to find I'd been upgraded free of charge to a balcony stateroom, a supposed perk for loyal passengers. The cabin was clean, modern, with crisp white sheets, fresh fruit on the table, and a sliding glass door opening onto the endless ocean. But taped neatly to the mirror above the desk was a small brass plaque, with the number 739 etched into it. And though I thought nothing of it at first, I would come to hate that number more than any in the world. The first day was normal. Sun, poolside cocktails, friendly strangers who invited me to trivia games and karaoke. I laughed, I danced, I almost felt alive again. But that night, when I returned to my cabin, I noticed something odd. The room felt colder than the hallway, a clammy, unnatural chill that seeped into my skin. I brushed it off as overactive air conditioning, curled up in bed, and eventually fell asleep. At around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was in the hallway, maybe a drunk guest fumbling with their key. But as I sat up, heart pounding, I realized the sound was inside my cabin walls, long, deliberate strokes like fingernails dragging slowly down metal. My breath caught in my throat as I whispered, "Hello?" And the scratching stopped instantly, replaced by silence so deep it rang in my ears. I convinced myself it had been part of a dream and forced myself back to sleep. But when I woke in the morning, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Faint grooves in the wall above the headboard, thin but unmistakable, as if something had clawed from the inside out. The second night was worse. Again the scratching woke me, only this time it was accompanied by whispers, low and fragmented, as though 2 or more voices were speaking just beyond the wall, overlapping each other, too muffled to understand but too deliberate to ignore. My skin crawled as I pressed my ear to the wall, and though I couldn't make out the words, one thing was certain. They were talking about me. The whispering cut off the second I moved back, replaced by laughter, soft, cruel, childlike. I bolted upright, flicked on every light, and didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I told a steward something strange was happening in my cabin. His smile faltered the moment I said 739. He leaned in and whispered, "Don't stay there," then hurried away without another word. By the third night, I was terrified to go back, but I had nowhere else to sleep. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion won. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of my balcony door sliding open. My heart lurched. I knew I had locked it. I sat up slowly, barely breathing, and there, silhouetted against the moonlit sea, was a figure. A woman, hair long and dripping wet, skin so pale it glowed. She stood with her back to me, swaying gently, and in her hand she clutched something dark and heavy that dripped steadily onto the carpet. My throat went dry as I whispered, "Hello?" She turned her head slightly, not all the way, just enough for me to see one eye, sunken, black, endless, and in that moment I realized she wasn't holding an object. She was holding a child, a lifeless child, limp in her arms, its tiny arm dangling, fingers brushing the floor. I screamed, scrambled for the door, flicked the lights on, and she was gone. The balcony door was still locked. The carpet was dry, the cabin empty. I begged the front desk to move me, sobbing, telling them my room was haunted. They exchanged nervous glances and muttered about being fully booked. When I demanded to know if something had happened in cabin 739, the manager's face hardened and she said, "That cabin doesn't exist. You must be mistaken." But I wasn't. I had the key, the plaque, the nightmares. The fourth night nearly broke me. I tried to barricade the door with furniture, but at 3 a.m. the lights in my cabin flickered violently, plunging me into darkness. The scratching returned, louder, frantic, surrounding me on all sides. Then the whispers rose, overlapping, chanting, and from the corner of the room I heard the unmistakable sound of a child crying. My body froze, cold sweat pouring down my back as a small shadow detached itself from the wall and crawled across the floor toward me. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and when it lifted its head, I saw a face swollen and purple, lips split, eyes bulging with broken capillaries. It opened its mouth, and instead of a scream, seawater poured out, flooding across the carpet toward my bed. I leapt up, slammed my hand against the wall switch, and every light exploded back to life. The shadow was gone. The floor was dry, but the grooves in the wall had deepened, fresh scratches cutting jagged lines across the paint. By the fifth night, I was half mad from lack of sleep. I roamed the ship during the day, avoiding my cabin until I couldn't anymore, but the moment I stepped inside, the chill enveloped me. I tried to leave a recording running overnight, desperate for proof. When I listened the next morning, my blood ran cold. For hours the tape was silent, then came scratching, then whispers, and then, clear as day, my own voice, though I had never spoken. She's mine now. I threw up in the bathroom, shaking violently. On the last night of the cruise, I knew something terrible was coming. I sat awake, clutching a lamp like a weapon, whispering prayers under my breath. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the room went ice cold, my breath fogging in the air. The balcony door rattled violently, though still locked. And then slowly, with agonizing creaks, the headboard began to bulge outward, as if something was pushing from inside the wall. Cracks split the plaster, and a hand, gray, waterlogged, with blackened nails, burst through, grasping blindly. I screamed, backed into the corner as another hand tore free, then a face, bloated, eyeless, dripping seawater. It forced itself halfway out of the wall, gurgling, "You shouldn't be here," before vanishing into nothing, leaving the wall pristine, unbroken, as if it had never happened. When the ship docked, I stumbled off, trembling, sleepless, barely able to walk. I told the police, but the cruise line insisted there was no cabin 739. My photos of the plaque were corrupted, black static. My keycard had vanished from my purse. It was as if the cabin had never existed. But I know it did. I slept in it. I saw what lives there. And sometimes when I'm home in Portland, I wake at night to the sound of scratching in my apartment walls. Faint at first, then louder, closer. The whispers follow me now, no matter where I go. Because once you've slept in cabin 739, you never really leave it. The crew quarters. My name is Sarah Connors, and I used to think cruise ships were safe little worlds floating above danger. Islands of light and laughter where nothing bad could happen. But that was before I discovered what really goes on beneath the smiling faces and endless buffets. What hides in the bowels of those floating cities, in the places passengers are never supposed to see. Because 3 years ago, I took a week-long cruise on the Ocean Majesty with my sister Emily to celebrate her college graduation. And though we boarded with dreams of sunbathing, cocktails, and sisterly bonding, only one of us left that ship alive, and the story the cruise line told the authorities was a lie. A neat package of accident and tragedy to keep the headlines clean. But I know the truth. I lived it. I still wake up at night hearing the muffled screams, the pounding fists on steel doors, the echo of footsteps chasing us down the narrow, rust-stained corridors of the crew quarters deep below, where the ship doesn't want you to go, where the walls themselves seem to breathe with something alive and hungry. The first days of the trip were perfect. Sun, music, laughter, too many piña coladas, and Emily glowing with joy. Her hair catching the sun as she leaned over the rails, talking about her future, about the life she was ready to start, and for the first time since our mother died, we felt free, like we were finally moving forward. And I can't tell you how badly I wish it had stayed that way, how desperately I wish we never left the safety of the passenger decks. But Emily was always curious, always pushing boundaries, and on the third night, as we were coming back to our cabin tipsy from dancing, she noticed a door in the hallway propped open by a mop, a door marked crew only, and she grinned at me, that mischievous grin I'd known since childhood, and whispered, "Want to see how the other half lives?" I laughed, shook my head, told her no, but she was already slipping inside, pulling me after her, our heels clicking against the stark linoleum, the music from the passenger decks fading behind us as the air grew colder, the lights dimmer, the walls narrower. We thought we'd find storage rooms, maybe staff taking breaks, but instead the corridors twisted endlessly, sterile and silent, Doors locked tight with heavy bolts, some of them marked only with numbers, others unmarked entirely. I remember Emily whispering, "Why would they need locks this strong?" And the hairs on my arms rising at the thought. We should have turned back, but something about the silence pulled us deeper, like the ship itself wanted us lost. Then we heard it. A muffled sound behind one of the locked doors, like a cry, faint and strangled. Emily froze, her eyes wide, then pressed her ear to the steel. "There's someone in there," she whispered. I pulled her back, my gut twisting, but then we heard it again. 3 distinct bangs, slow and deliberate, followed by a weak voice gasping, "Please." Every instinct screamed to leave, but Emily couldn't. She knocked softly, whispering, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" There was silence, then a scraping sound and the faintest reply, "Don't. Stay away. They'll hear." My blood ran cold. Who was locked in there? Why? Before we could ask more, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, fast, deliberate. Panic surged and we bolted, heels clattering, breath ragged, the sound of boots pounding after us. We turned corners blindly, the air stinking of rust and mold. And at one point I swear I heard doors creak open behind us, multiple footsteps joining the chase, but I didn't dare look back. Somehow we found the service stairwell, burst through it, and didn't stop running until we were back on the passenger deck, gasping, shaking, drenched in sweat. Emily wanted to report it immediately, but when we told a staff member, a uniformed officer with a practiced smile, his face tightened for just a split second before smoothing into calm denial. "There are no locked rooms below deck, ladies," he said flatly. "You must have gotten lost. Please stay out of restricted areas for your own safety." His tone made it clear this conversation was over. Emily argued, insisted we'd heard someone begging for help, but the officer cut her off sharply, his voice dropping low. "For your own good, drop it." That night, we tried to convince ourselves it was nothing, that maybe we'd been drunk, imagining things, but deep down we knew it wasn't true. The next night, Emily disappeared. We'd gone to the midnight buffet together, laughing, piling plates with desserts we didn't need, and afterward she said she wanted to grab something from the cabin before meeting me on deck. She never came back. At first I thought she got distracted, maybe ran into friends, but as the minutes stretched into hours, dread set in. I searched the decks, asked crew members, but they brushed me off with polite smiles, saying she was probably just enjoying herself. When I demanded they make an announcement, they refused. By dawn I was frantic, pounding on the captain's door, screaming that my sister was missing. Only then did they take me to the security office, a cramped room with grainy monitors showing various parts of the ship. They played back footage of Emily leaving the buffet, walking down the hall toward our cabin. And then the screen flickered, glitched, static ripping across the image, and when it cleared, she was gone. Just gone. The officer rewound, replayed, shook his head, muttering about technical errors. I screamed at him, but he just stared with those cold, dead eyes and said, "Sometimes people fall overboard. It's tragic, but it happens." I knew they were lying. I knew she hadn't fallen, she'd been taken. I begged them to search the lower decks, to open those locked doors, but they refused, insisting again that there are no such doors. That night, unable to sleep, I went back, alone. My hands shook as I slipped into the crew-only door, the same cold silence pressing down on me, the same narrow hall stretching endlessly. I crept deeper, heart hammering, until I reached the door where Emily and I had heard the cries. I pressed my ear against it, and my blood turned to ice. From inside came a faint, broken sob. A woman's voice. Emily's voice. I pounded on the steel until my fists bled, screaming her name, but before I could do more, I heard them. The footsteps, the boots, closing in. I ran again, but this time I wasn't fast enough. A hand shot out from the shadows, gripping my arm, pulling me toward the dark. I fought like a wild animal, biting, scratching, screaming. And by some miracle I broke free, sprinting until I found the stairwell, bursting onto the passenger deck like a lunatic. I tried to tell people what happened, begged them to help me free my sister, but no one believed me. By morning, the official announcement was made. "We regret to inform you that passenger Emily Connors has been lost at sea." Lost at sea. Those bastards had locked her below and called it an accident. The ship docked 2 days later. I left hollow, broken, screaming her name until my voice gave out. The cruise line sent condolences, offered me money to ease the pain, but I don't want their blood money. I want the truth. I've spent every day since digging, researching disappearances at sea, and I've found too many stories, too many families with the same blank corporate answers. Passengers vanish. Records are wiped. Crew members quit and are never heard from again. And deep in those locked quarters behind steel doors, the ship keeps its secrets. I don't know if Emily is alive. I don't know if she's dead. But I know she's down there. I still hear her voice in my dreams crying out from behind steel, begging me not to stop. And I won't. Because if you ever find yourself on a cruise ship, laughing on deck while the sun sets, just remember, below your feet, in the crew quarters you'll never see, someone is screaming and no one wants you to hear. Lost at Sea. My name is Daniel Harris, and before last summer I loved the ocean more than anything else in the world. I grew up near the coast, spent my weekends fishing with my dad, and when I finally had a family of my own, I dreamed of sharing that same wonder with my wife Claire and our 14-year-old son, Matthew. But now, whenever I hear the crash of waves or see a horizon line stretching endless in blue, all I feel is dread, because out there, beyond what anyone can see, something waits, something hungry, something that took my boy from me and left me hollow, and though the cruise company insists it was an accident, I will never forget the way his eyes looked in those final moments, the way his voice broke when he screamed for me, the way the sea itself seemed alive as it pulled him under. And I know if you hear me out, if you read every word I'm about to say, you'll understand why I can't let this go. It began with what was supposed to be a celebration, our 20th wedding anniversary, a week-long Caribbean cruise on the celestial horizon, a towering ship gleaming white and gold, packed with restaurants, theaters, pools, and people from all over the world, laughter echoing down its decks as music pulsed into the night, and for the first 3 days it was everything we hoped it would be. Warm sun, cold drinks, too much food, Matthew darting between activities with the boundless energy only a teenager can have, and Claire and I sitting on deck chairs watching him, holding hands like we were young again. I remember thinking, this is it. This is happiness. This is what I fought through every hard year for. But happiness, I've learned, is fragile. A bubble that pops the moment you start to believe it might last, and mine shattered on the 4th night. When Matthew vanished into the sea and I realized the ocean doesn't give, it only takes. That night started with a talent show. Kids singing and dancing while parents clapped proudly, and Matthew, always brave, signed up to tell jokes, his voice cracking with nervous laughter as he delivered punchlines that made half the crowd groan and the other half cheer. He beamed at us when it was over, and later, as the 3 of us walked the deck under the stars, he said, "Dad, I think I want to stay out a little longer, just to look at the water." I hesitated, but the night was calm, the sea smooth as glass, and he was almost 15, so I said yes, warning him not to lean too far over the rail. He rolled his eyes like only teenagers can and said, "I'll be fine, Dad." I kissed his forehead, and Claire ruffled his hair, and then we went back to our cabin. I wish to God we hadn't. It must have been an hour later when I woke to the sound of voices outside our door, hurried, urgent, and then a knock that jolted me upright. A crew member stood there pale and sweating, asking if our son was with us. My stomach turned to stone. "Of course he's not," I snapped. "He said he was on deck." The man's eyes flickered and he muttered, "There's been an incident." Claire was already screaming before he finished the sentence. We raced to the upper deck where a cluster of passengers stood near the rail, murmuring, their faces pale in the moonlight. A woman grabbed my arm and whispered, I saw your boy, he was leaning over, then something pulled him." My head spun. I forced my way to the railing, and when I looked down into the black churn of water below, the world collapsed. There was nothing. No Matthew. No splash of movement. Just the sea, endless and merciless. The official story came quickly. He had leaned too far, lost his balance, and fallen. Tragic, but not unheard of. The captain promised a search. The Coast Guard was contacted, the ship slowed, spotlights swept across the waves, lifeboats deployed. For hours we scanned the water, calling his name until our voices were raw. Nothing. No trace. By morning the search was called off. The ocean had swallowed my son whole, and I was expected to accept that. But I couldn't, because I knew there was more to it. You see, that woman who'd spoken to me, she said something else, something no one wanted to repeat. It wasn't just a fall, she whispered. Something was in the water. It grabbed him. He screamed. When I demanded she repeat it to the crew, she shook her head, terrified, muttering, "They won't believe me." And she was right. No one wanted to hear about shapes moving beneath the surface, about arms that weren't arms, about the way Matthew's scream had been cut short, as if water had filled his lungs before he even hit the waves. But I couldn't let it go. For the rest of that cursed voyage, I became obsessed. I wandered the decks at night, staring into the water, waiting for any sign. I spoke to staff who refused to look me in the eye, asked if anyone else had gone missing, if there were reports of strange sightings, and every time I was met with silence or a quick change of subject. But late on the 6th night, a janitor, old and tired, pulled me aside and muttered, "It's not the first time. Some say this ship sails over a graveyard. The sea remembers and it takes what it's owed." His hands trembled as he pushed past me, leaving me more shaken than before. I barely slept, barely ate, and Claire was slipping into a catatonia of grief I couldn't pull her out of. Then on the final night of the cruise, something happened that confirmed my worst fears. I was standing alone on deck, staring at the black water, when I heard it. A voice, my son's voice. Faint, distorted, carried on the wind. "Dad, help me." My chest tightened as I staggered to the railing. "Matthew?" I shouted, desperate. And there, just for a moment, I saw him, his face breaking through the surface, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth opening and closing like a drowning fish. I screamed his name, but before I could call again, something else rose up behind him. A pale, twisting shape like a hand made of water, wrapping around him and dragging him under. The sea went still. My legs buckled, and I collapsed on the deck, sobbing. The ship docked the next morning. Claire and I left as hollow shells, reporters asking questions, cruise representatives offering condolences, but nothing they said mattered. My boy was gone, taken not by accident, but by something that lives beneath those waves, something that watches, waits, and chooses its victims carefully. I see it every night when I close my eyes, the way his hand reached up just out of my grasp before he vanished forever. People tell me to move on, to accept that accidents happen, that the sea is unforgiving, but I can't. Because when I dream, I hear him, his voice calling to me from the depths, begging me not to forget him. And I know I never will, because Matthew isn't just lost at sea. He's trapped there, and one day when the ocean decides it's my turn, I'll join him. The Empty Balcony. My name is Jason Miller, and there is something about the sea that I will never look at the same way again. Something that has ruined the sound of waves for me, that has stolen the comfort of the ocean breeze and replaced it with a pit in my stomach, a reminder of what I lost and what I cannot explain to anyone without sounding insane. Though I swear on my daughter's life, or what's left of her, that every word I'm about to say is true, that it happened exactly as I remember it, and that if you ever find yourself on a cruise ship with a balcony next to an empty one, you should pray that you never hear the laughter of someone who isn't supposed to be there. I was 37 then, newly divorced, trying to rebuild myself after a messy separation that had left me drained financially and emotionally. But my daughter Lily, who was 8 at the time, was the one bright light in all of it, the reason I hadn't completely collapsed, the reason I woke up every morning determined to keep going. I had promised her a vacation, just the two of us, something special to mark the beginning of our new life together. And when I saw the ad for a family-friendly Caribbean cruise, 7 days of sun pools and adventure, it felt like exactly the kind of thing we both needed. We booked a balcony cabin on the Mariner of the Seas, a sprawling floating city of neon lights, buffets, water slides, and smiling staff who promised endless fun. When we boarded in Miami, Lily's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. She ran from railing to railing, pointing at everything, her small hands clutching mine, her hair whipping around in the salty wind. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The first 2 days were perfect, just like a commercial for happiness. We swam in the pool. We ate too much soft serve. We stayed up late watching movies on the giant screen under the stars. And every night, when we returned to our cabin, Lily would rush out onto the balcony, press her face against the glass and whisper, "Good night, ocean." It became a ritual, something sweet and innocent that made me think maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay after all. But on the 3rd night, Lily's ritual changed, and with it, my entire life unraveled. We had just returned from dinner, a casual buffet where Lily had proudly piled her plate with pizza and French fries, when she darted straight to the balcony as usual. I was still kicking off my shoes when I heard her giggle, a sound so pure it made me smile automatically. "Who are you waving at, Bug?" I asked, expecting her to be pointing at another child on a nearby balcony. But when I stepped outside, the blood drained from my face. She wasn't pointing at another child. She was waving at the balcony next to ours, an empty balcony, curtains drawn, no lights, no movement. "Daddy, she's funny," Lily said, her little hand fluttering enthusiastically. My throat tightened. "Who's funny?" I asked carefully. She giggled again. "The lady next door. She waves funny." I forced a smile I didn't feel and said, "Honey, there's no one there. That room's empty." She frowned, clearly annoyed that I wasn't seeing what she saw. "She's right there, Daddy. She has long hair and a white dress. She says she likes my teddy bear." My stomach turned to ice. There was no woman. I knew what I was looking at, an empty balcony. But Lily's smile was wide, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. That night, after I finally coaxed her to bed, I sat on the balcony alone, staring at the silent, lifeless balcony beside ours. The ship's itinerary listed the cabins, and I was certain I had seen a note earlier that the one next to us was unoccupied. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Kids have wild imaginations, right? Maybe Lily had overheard another passenger. Maybe she was inventing a playmate out of boredom. But the next morning, when she greeted the lady again, describing her in more detail, pale skin, dark eyes, and always wearing the same flowing white dress, I felt the first prickles of unease. I tried to laugh it off, but later, as we walked the ship, I asked a steward casually if anyone was staying in the cabin beside ours. He hesitated for the briefest moment before saying, "No, sir, that cabin is closed." My mouth went dry. Over the next few days, Lily grew more and more attached to her invisible friend. She saved seats for her at the pool. She insisted on ordering extra dessert for the lady. She whispered to the balcony at night, giggling as though someone was whispering back. Every time I told her there was no one there, she grew upset, tears brimming in her eyes. "She's real, Daddy. You just don't want to see her." I began to lose sleep, sitting up late on the balcony, staring at the empty space, waiting for movement, for proof, for anything to validate or disprove what my daughter so firmly believed. On the fifth night, I got my answer. I had just put Lily to bed when I heard her voice, soft and sleepy, murmuring, "Good night." Thinking she was talking to me, I poked my head in, but her eyes were fixed on the balcony, the curtain swaying slightly, though the glass door was shut. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw it. For just a fraction of a second, the curtain on the empty balcony shifted, and behind it was the unmistakable outline of a figure. A woman. My heart lurched into my throat, and I stumbled back. But when I blinked, the curtain was still again, and the balcony was empty. I told myself it had been the wind, the rocking of the ship, a trick of the light. But deep down I knew better. The next day, I asked one of the bartenders if anything strange had ever happened on Deck 8. He gave me a look I'll never forget. A look that said he wanted to answer but couldn't. Finally, in a low voice, he muttered, "Don't let your little girl play near that balcony." His eyes darted away, and he refused to say more. That night, I barely slept. I locked the balcony door, double-checked it 3 times, but around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of soft laughter. Lily's laughter. My heart stopped. I rushed to her bed, empty. The balcony door was wide open, the curtains billowing in the wind. Panic exploded in my chest as I stumbled outside, calling her name. And there she was. My little girl was standing on the railing of the empty balcony, her small hands reaching out, her face glowing with joy. "Daddy, she wants me to come with her," she cried. I screamed her name, lunged across the railing, but as my fingers brushed hers, a blast of icy wind surged between us, and she was gone. Just gone. I collapsed, sobbing, clawing at the air, my body shaking with a grief so deep it felt like my heart had been ripped from my chest. Security searched the ship. They told me she must have climbed over and fallen. They wrote it up as a tragic accident, another statistic in the long, sad history of cruise ship disappearances. But I know better. I know what I saw. I know my daughter didn't fall. She was taken. Taken by the woman in white who lived on that balcony. The woman no one would admit was real. The woman who had been waiting for someone just like Lily. I left that ship a broken man, a father without a child. And though the world calls it an accident, I will go to my grave knowing the truth, that the sea doesn't just swallow bodies, it takes souls too. And somewhere out there on some other cruise, Another little girl is waving at an empty balcony, smiling at someone her father can't see. The man from cabin 409. My name is Emily Carter, and I have carried the story inside me for 3 long years. A story that has haunted every quiet night since. A story that sometimes makes me doubt my own sanity, and other times makes me absolutely certain that evil walks among us in ways we will never understand. I was 29 then, newly married, deeply in love, and convinced that the future stretched before me like a golden road. My husband Daniel and I had survived nursing school together in Chicago, working ourselves to the bone, running on caffeine and stubbornness, and when we graduated, we promised each other that our lives would finally slow down, that we would find joy again outside of hospital walls and endless double shifts. We married in the spring, surrounded by family and friends. And for our honeymoon, we booked a 7-day Caribbean cruise on a massive ship called the Ocean Crest. It was the kind of vacation I had only dreamed of when I was growing up. Sun-drenched decks, turquoise seas, and a private balcony cabin where we could drink champagne under the stars. I thought it would be the start of forever. Instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare that I can never fully wake from. The first 2 days were perfect, exactly the kind of bliss people imagine when they think of a honeymoon. We lounged by the pool. We laughed as we tried tropical drinks that tasted like melted popsicles. We dressed up for dinner in one of the ship's fine restaurants and fed each other bites of decadent desserts. And at night we walked hand in hand along the deck, the salty air wrapping around us like a blanket. I can still picture the moonlight shimmering across the endless black water, Daniel's arm warm and steady around my shoulders, and the deep, soothing hum of the ship's engines beneath our feet. For 2 days I felt like I was living inside a postcard, but everything changed on the 3rd night, and that's when I first noticed cabin 409. Our own cabin was on deck 9 midship, a lovely balcony room that opened to a view of the endless horizon. Directly across the narrow hallway was cabin 409, a door identical to every other, dark wood, brass number plate, and a little slot for a key card. I hadn't paid it much attention until that 3rd night, when Daniel and I returned from dinner slightly tipsy and full of laughter. As we walked down the hall, I noticed that while every other cabin door had a faint glow of light seeping from beneath, cabin 409 was utterly dark, the overhead light above it flickering in a way that made the shadows dance strangely across the door. "Guess nobody's home," I joked, but Daniel was fiddling with our keycard and didn't even look. We tumbled into our room still laughing, and I thought nothing of it. But later that night, long after Daniel had drifted into the deep, steady breathing of sleep, I found myself restless. I slipped out onto our balcony for some air, the waves whispering below and the stars sharp against the velvet sky. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but no. Standing on the balcony of cabin 409 was a man. He was tall, maybe over 6 feet, broad in the shoulders, his face pale in the moonlight. He stood utterly still, and I realized with a sick drop in my stomach that he was staring directly at me. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking, expressionless, like he had been waiting for me to notice him. I froze, my hand tightening on the railing, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, without a word, he stepped back into the dark cabin and the glass door slid shut. The breath I had been holding burst out in a shaky laugh. "Just another passenger," I whispered to myself. Maybe he had insomnia like me, maybe he was just curious, but there was something in the way he had stared, something that felt more like recognition than curiosity. And even when I went back inside, I couldn't shake the cold that had seeped into my bones. The next morning, over breakfast, I asked Daniel if he had noticed anyone in cabin 409. He looked up from his eggs, confused. "Across from us? Haven't seen anyone go in or out. Why?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No reason. Just wondered." I didn't want him to laugh at me, not when everything else about this trip was so perfect. We spent the day in port, wandering through colorful streets, buying cheap souvenirs, eating food so spicy it made Daniel's eyes water. By the time we returned to the ship, the memory of the pale man had almost faded into the background. Almost. That night, Daniel wanted to go down to one of the bars to watch a live band, but I was tired, so I stayed behind. I showered, slipped into one of the fluffy robes the cruise line provided, and was brushing my hair in front of the mirror when I heard it. The soft click of a door opening across the hall. I froze, brush mid-stroke, and listened. There it was again, the faint shuffle of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward our door. My throat tightened as I crept to the peephole, pressing my eye to the glass. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing in front of cabin 409 was the same man from the balcony. He wasn't knocking, wasn't moving, just standing there with his face turned toward our door. His skin looked almost gray under the flickering light. His eyes dark hollows that seemed to absorb rather than reflect. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Seconds stretching into minutes, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he might hear it. Then slowly, he turned and walked back into cabin 409. The door closed with a soft click. I stumbled back, clutching the edge of the dresser to steady myself, my legs trembling. When Daniel returned, laughing and slightly drunk, I tried to tell him, but the words sounded insane, even as I said them. "There's a man across the hall." He was just standing there watching. Daniel frowned, then chuckled. It's a cruise ship." People are weird. Probably just another guy wandering the halls. He kissed my forehead and told me not to worry. But I did worry. I worried the entire night, lying awake, listening to every creak and groan of the ship, every distant footstep in the hallway. And by morning, I knew I had to know who was in that cabin. I started casually asking the steward assigned to our hallway if all the cabins were occupied. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled politely and said, "Most of them, yes, ma'am." It was the kind of answer that said nothing and everything all at once. Later, in one of the ship's lounges, I struck up conversation with an older couple who had been on dozens of cruises. When I mentioned cabin 409, their faces changed subtly, just enough for me to notice. "Oh, honey," the woman said quickly. "Don't pay attention to cabin numbers. You'll spook yourself for no reason." Her husband cleared his throat and changed the subject. That was when I knew something was wrong, something nobody wanted to talk about. That night, I convinced Daniel to sit on our balcony with me. We drank wine, laughed, tried to act normal, but my eyes kept flicking to the balcony next door. It stayed dark, the curtains drawn, the glass reflecting only the silver wash of moonlight. Daniel teased me for being jumpy, but when he finally went inside to use the bathroom, I saw it again. Movement behind the glass. A pale face pressed against the curtain watching. I gasped, nearly dropping my glass, but when Daniel came back out, there was nothing, just darkness. Over the next 2 days, the tension grew unbearable. I began to dread returning to our cabin, dread walking down that hallway with 409 looming across from us like a silent sentinel. Twice I heard soft knocks on our door late at night, but when I looked, there was no one there. Once I woke to find our balcony door unlocked, though I was certain I had latched it. Daniel started growing irritated with me, accusing me of letting paranoia ruin our trip. "It's just a room, Emily, forget about it." But I couldn't. I couldn't forget the way that man's eyes had bored into me. The way he seemed less like a fellow passenger and more like a shadow wearing human skin. On the 6th night, everything came to a head. Daniel finally fed up, declared he was going to march over to cabin 409 and prove to me that it was just a normal room. I begged him not to, my hand shaking as I clutched his arm. But he kissed my cheek, smiled that infuriatingly confident smile, and said, "I'll be back in 2 minutes." He stepped across the hall and knocked. Silence. He knocked again, louder. "See?" he said over his shoulder. But before I could answer, the door creaked open. I swear to you, Emily, the air in that hallway changed in that moment. It grew colder, heavier, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. Daniel frowned, peered inside, and said, "Hello?" Then he stepped across the threshold. The door closed behind him with a soft, deliberate click, and I never saw him again. I screamed his name, pounded on the door until my fists ached, begged him to come out, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just silence pressing against me like a weight. I ran to the nearest steward, sobbing, but when I dragged him back, cabin 409 was locked, the hallway empty. "There is no guest in 409, the steward said firmly, his eyes flat and unreadable. "You must be mistaken." I wasn't mistaken. I knew what I had seen. I knew where Daniel had gone. But no one on that ship would listen. The captain told me that sometimes passengers wander off, that Daniel had likely gotten lost after too many drinks. The other guests whispered behind their hands, avoiding my gaze. And every time I walked back to our cabin, my eyes burned holes into that door across the hall, daring it to open again. On the final night of the cruise, exhausted from crying, I stood on our balcony staring at the black water below. That's when I heard it, the soft slide of a glass door. I turned and my blood turned to ice. Daniel stood on the balcony of cabin 409. Only it wasn't really him. His skin was as pale as the man I had first seen, his eyes dark and empty, his smile cold and wrong. He raised a hand slowly, almost in greeting, and for a moment I thought he might step across to me. But then the glass door slid shut, and the balcony went dark. When the ship docked the next morning, Daniel was declared missing at sea. They said he must have fallen overboard, another tragic accident on a list far too long. His body was never recovered. I returned home alone, my honeymoon turned into a funeral. To this day, I cannot sleep without seeing his face in that balcony window, pale and hollow, watching me from the other side of the glass. And I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that whatever lives in cabin 409 is still there, waiting for the next person unlucky enough to cross its path.